Okay, so by the way, Devinder is just back from a trip to China and Singapore where he was attending Super AI. He also has been a part of multiple events, multiple talks, and I would like to first ask Devinder to explain and give an overview of like how does he perceive the difference in how AI is transitioning or progressing here in the US and what's happening in the East.
I think that's a great topic.
Oh my God, so we have 45 minutes, right? I'll start with, I was extremely impressed. This was my first time in China, my first time in Shanghai. I was so impressed with the infrastructure overall. When you go to the companies, I was lucky enough that a bunch of companies were trying to line up to talk. Some of them are becoming partners, but there was a huge aspect of how can we practically get started right away, right? In the Bay Area, we have this ideation phase and experimentation phase that we get into. A lot of the startups, especially the really young ones, they want like talk about like all of these cool things we can do. I saw a little bit of that in the robotics space, and again, I was there for 2 weeks, so this is like a very, very isolated component of that experience. But there was so much momentum behind actually getting shit done that I was really, really impressed. Momentum behind getting stuff done. Yeah.
Okay, that's a great experience, I guess, and you know, we as people from the Silicon Valley, we think like China has done a lot. There are so many things that keep coming up. Open source models are taking the center stage right now. GLM has launched 5.2. There are other companies like DeepSeek. Every time they are trying to break the barrier with the reasoning models specifically. How do we? And Prashanth is also here. He's in the space of inference. So how do we understand the difference between the necessity of using a large language model and a small language model in our agentic workflows? Everyone in this room probably is using a large language model because it's easy. It's like they have a huge distribution. It's easy to use the endpoints, run your agents. But that happens when you're trying to run your agents in a a pre-production phase, or maybe in a testing phase, or maybe you're trying out some demos. The moment you move to production, you have to be concerned about cost. You have to be concerned about latency and so many other factors that take it. So I would like to know both of your views regarding how you perceive that large language models and small language models. How are they, different in terms of usage, particularly for AI agents, and something that everyone in this room would have a key takeaway when they leave, that how they should explore and understand each of them.
That's actually a very, very relevant question, because a couple weeks ago, if you follow Greg Brockman, the OpenAI's co-founder on Twitter, actually, he tweeted something. The model is not the product anymore. I don't know if you've seen that. A guy who is actually, entire business is built on top of the model, he's saying model is not the product anymore. He has every incentive to say model is the product, right? No, he's not saying that. Model is not the product anymore. So where is it coming from is basically we are moving way past the model right now. So we can commoditize the model. The model is already commoditized basically. So, thank you. So small models versus bigger models. So first of all, so the majority of the developers or enterprises are using mostly the flagship models like OpenAI or Anthropic models. So right now, because the quality is obviously better, and then we have Chinese open source models, or even we have our own. Recently, NVIDIA also released their own open source models, and we have some small models from Google as well, HM31B. They perform really great actually. So what is the difference? So when you actually from the small models actually and from the big model, what the only difference is how do they perform, obviously, and they are actually trained on much larger data than the small models. But the model is just the model, it's the brain basically. They don't have any context of your use case. That is exactly where the small models come in. So that is exactly what I was explaining actually earlier with our skills actually. You can give the model the context, whatever the context that you're working on, your domain knowledge, and then you can turn it into a very, very, very powerful model. That is exactly what I was trying to show you through the skills actually. What we did was, we gave the context through the skill, the .md file, to the very small 35-bit model, and then it performs almost equivalent to a 500-bit model, if it has the right context. That is exactly what I was trying to say. So, what do we need to use for the agentic workloads? Smaller ones? Do we need a small models? Do we need a bigger model? You know, in agentic workloads, basically you have the agent is doing multiple tasks. So, for example, you're asking the agent, oh, go read my emails and then send an emails and then make me an appointment with my doctor and then go, let's do a deep research on agentic infrastructure. So when you're giving all these questions to the agent, right? So what's happening in the background is most people use the same model, like a flagship model for 1 trillion parameter model or whatever it is, but you actually don't need it. So your reading the emails can just do it within a 7-bit model, and the deep research can use the 1 trillion parameter model, yes, and then make an appointment, maybe it needs a 35-bit model. But we don't actually don't have a mechanism to route this different tasks to the different model. So if we can really get it to that level, we can route the model to the right tasks. That will be way more cheaper, and we are seeing actually in practice right now. That is exactly what we are building. So we do not, what my conclusion in that regard is, we do not really need a 1 trillion parameter model. And I also want you to know that since January, open source model adoption has gone by twice.
All right. One thing I think engineers and business people agree on. How many engineers in here, by the way? How many people were on the business side of things? So wait, one thing I think both of you guys agree on typically is trade-offs. Every single decision you make is based on trade-offs, right? If it's much easier to include a cloud application, especially if you work for like an enterprise, you use the thing that's been proved. If it's much tougher to get regulatory past a small $1 billion parameter model, because you don't have enough data on whether it's going to actually give you meaningful results or things that you can actually work with or things that you can prove to your boss are good enough to get past the goal line, that's a trade-off. So it all comes down to trade-offs. And the thing that I would argue that's really been commoditized is technical work. And the things that still remain the same are the same things that have always mattered at the highest level, especially as your business grows, right? If you have 100 customers, you're not as worried about risk profiles. If you have 100,000 customers, you start to worry very much about regulatory processes and like whether you're SOC 2 compliant and all these other things. So some of these models come packaged, especially like early days, half the reason people use Microsoft Copilot as opposed to like Claude or OpenAI is because they were one of the first to come out with like a license and an agreement that large tech could get behind and be like, these are the things we guarantee, you own the code that's generated, and then these are the risks that we're willing to take on. Lawyers can read that and they can approve that. And the same kind of thing trickles down, especially as technical work becomes commoditized, is that you figure out where the trade-offs lie, you figure out what's the lowest cost for your business that also minimizes risk, and then you move forward with that. That's, I think, always going to be the game.
Fair points, but I somehow feel that the need for personalized models, where you are training on your own data, getting your models to do things that is more like relevant to your workflows, and not depending on third-party providers, or maybe in some sense, we recently saw how Fable and Mythos, they were released, and you know, these kind of things can happen. We cannot control the decisions from the government or decisions from the providers, even you know, how they are going to use the data that we are interacting with the chat systems, with the LLMs, you know, the API endpoints. Of course, like they do sign an agreement when we are signing contracts with them for enterprise scale use, that none of our data is going to be trained for their own models, but nobody knows what happens underneath. And the rate at which these labs are sourcing data and trying to improve the scale of their models, it kind of shows that yeah, they are progressing. The smaller ones, or maybe the open source model providers, are catching up by doing distillation and several other mechanisms. We came across such news last year as well when Anthropic claimed that all the Chinese labs are trying to distill their models for getting better performance. But why not we talk about personal models where each one of us can have our own version of a model? I mean, Prashanth is working on serverless GPUs where you can host your models, something of that sort. It may not be as large as like a trillion parameters or maybe triple digit billion parameters. It can be something single digit billion parameters, but it has to be effective. If we are working on the agentic workflows, in the sense the hardness, everything that goes around the model, if that is really great, I think we can still do a fair better job with a smaller model as well.
We take this first, if you don't mind.
What you're talking about is the age-old problem in vendor locking, right? Now I'm stuck in this database, I can't use the other database. Why wouldn't I use a database at home? Everyone has this problem, right? And there's a reason that not everyone is using a database at home or SQLite, because the things that these specific models come with have specific needs. Who prefers Claude Code for coding? Who prefers the Google model for coding? Right? There's intrinsic properties that some of these models have that they marketed really, really well, and they're actually good at. And that might change like at the next release, like you said. And so the problem around the second component that you mentioned is more of like, it's not a model personalization, it's data personalization. And that's an age-old thing too, because we've had a lot of like attributed data since like 2013. Your IP attached to you and all your data. Can we use it in a meaningful way, utilizing any state-of-the-art model? And will that produce meaningful results? Yes. There's a lot of products being built around that kind of thing, exactly. So the final piece is, do I actually need to go through the pain of creating my own model, which would require training your own weights, building your own thing? And like the smallest version of it that might be meaningful is like a Pico model, right? Like a mini model that's like a few hundred million parameters that you can use for one specific use case. The amount of pain you go through that, and this is the same thing, this is the same reason you don't make your food every single night, this is the reason you go to restaurants, right? Is because you just don't want to go through the pain. And so I think all three of those problems are distinct. One is vendor lock-in, which is an age-old problem, we can tackle that. Two is actually managing your own data. And finally, do I want to make my own bread?
So it's a triangle. Cost, security, privacy, security, and performance. So this is the end goal for the enterprise use case, basically, if they want to adopt whether the open source model or the closed source model. Ever since the Fable thing happened, enterprises already started looking into the open source models because there is a momentum called own your intelligence. You don't want to rent your intelligence to somebody. That is exactly what we've been saying actually. The Microsoft CEO, Satya Nadella, actually, he tweeted exactly that. It's not going to be a one model or anything like that. And at the end of the day, every enterprise is going to have their one model. It doesn't mean that it costs a lot to fine-tune a model, and then you fine-tune it fine, and then you work it out somehow. Maybe you can make it cheaper with a smaller model. You don't need a trillion parameter model. But then what happens when the data changes, right? Because you update your data, and then you have to fine-tune again, right? So you're back to the same problem. So the having your own model is not a solution at all. There are other things actually you can do. That is exactly the persistent KV cache, actually, that's what I was talking about. So every enterprise needs their own domain knowledge within the model. They want the model to act like it's their own model, but how do you make it happen? It doesn't have the context of your domain knowledge or expertise. So that can be done through other ways. So what I mean to say is basically, even if you use a cloud level model, it's probably great for coding, yes, for general coding. But if you want it to be a domain expert, it cannot be your domain expert, right? No matter what. So that is exactly why we need the smaller models. We can design the smaller models to act even more like an expertise according to your domain expertise, domain knowledge, and then you can serve it internally without renting your intelligence. So I don't think it's going to be like, oh, cloud is going to be the solution for all enterprises or every use case, or there's going to be a God model that's going to save us all. That is exactly how Anthropic actually, they act, you know. They have actually, I don't know if you guys know, Anthropic have as a constitution. Literally, they do have a constitution if you go read it. So they call it basically, they want to, in the end of the day, they want to control everything. And there's going to be this God model that's going to save everyone. That is exactly what they're building towards. But with the recent tobacco of Fable 5, I think the enterprise are looking more towards smaller models, open source models, so they can actually own their intelligence, so they don't have to depend on their either the government, I don't want to go to government, but or some kind of a private entity that controls everything. So if end of the day, what's going to happen is it's going to be small models that's going to be either, I don't think it's going to be fine tuning, but there's going to be other mechanisms called persistent KV cache or something like that that can be indexed into the context of the model, and then that can be used with much more, it's cheaper cost. So that is exactly what I was saying, the triangle. Cost, how it performs with your domain expertise, and the privacy and security. Those things gonna matter. Whoever wins this triangle, they're gonna survive.
Again, cost is something that all these enterprise clients, customers are trying to talk about. Recently, everyone, almost a lot of companies, they are starting to mention that they have depleted their budget for in the Q1 of 2026. Uber, I think, was one of the first companies to publicly come up and mention that. And there were other companies also raising concerns about what is the ROI, whatever investments they are making in terms of using these models from the model providers. What is the ROI? Are they able to get the ROI? I'm pretty much sure it cannot happen overnight. It takes its own time. But looking at the cost that you incur at the end of the day with models from Anthropic or OpenAI or some of the other expensive frontier labs, how do we address this? How everyone in this room is probably using a $100 subscription or maybe $20 subscription from OpenAI, Anthropic. That's okay because we're doing it for our own product development, our own workflows. When I'm asking this question, I'm asking as an entrepreneur. I'm building my own product. I have to think about 10 different things like how do I run my evals? Because to run my evals, I cannot spend so much for Anthropic's models or OpenAI models. As an entrepreneur, how do I look forward to resolving this particular problem of cost? I may be starting out, there are companies who already have made it in the Fortune 500 list. Even they also are struggling with justifying the cost. So how do we address this?
Oh, sure. Either way.
Okay, about the budgets thing, right? The budgets for this year were set end of last year. Token maxing became a trend first quarter this year. That's the thing that happened. The reason people are blowing past their budgets partially is because there's an increased use of AI. But token maxing as a mandate for NVIDIA and all of these CEOs became a thing much more recently. And of course, these things have trickle-down effects where, oh, if Jensen's doing it, let's all do it, right? And then, oh shit, we're out of budget that we made in 2025, right? These things make adjustments. I wouldn't pay too much attention to this kind of a thing. In fact, I think those departments would have been well served by not paying as much attention to the company that literally sells all the GPUs. They're asked to token max. Because what a great marketing play, right? And you won, right? And anyone dealing in that space won. It's kind of ridiculous that people listen to trends like this. There's a ton of these talks that we do and we talk about where people create these, make up these trends, and because they're popular, everyone just follows suit. And it's just hilarious that people actually do the thing they're being asked to do to like maximize somebody else's revenue. Yay, we work for them. Okay, so that's one piece of it. The other part of it is also, there's a lot of techniques that you can explore to reduce your cost. I think Ray runs a class on this. You've done like a lot of workshops on this. Rather than token maxing, what you should be doing is maximizing your efficiency as you utilize your tokens. Tokens are also going down in cost at an exponential rate. We're also at some point going to hit like the end of subsidies that models are kind of getting. Like that $200 bill is not a $200 bill if you're like a super user. They might amortize that over the group of users, but of course they're not going to talk about that. The cost for like a super user is like somewhere around $2,000 per month, probably. At least that's according to like a couple of articles that I've read, which might be wrong. And then there's the other aspect of it. Can I utilize a smaller model to do my evals, right? If you're getting good enough eval results using that, and if it's worth your time to do that, then yes. But if you're spending about $9,000 worth of your time in your first 3 months as a very, very small startup to save $600 extra for an extra account, or like let's say even $5,000 in terms of compute, it's bad math, right? So understand the trade-offs that you're making upfront, and if you want to spend time on like customizing a bunch of your own work, just understand like what costs what and like how you're spending your time. Sometimes founders end up spending like 90-hour weeks justifying it and then being able to like somehow figuring out that, you know, I save money. That's okay in the short term, but not so great for your health. I shouldn't speak because I also do like 90-hour weeks all the time. But the idea is like, if you know your trade-offs, if you can see where the money's going, you can make much smarter decisions. And sometimes it is, you know, utilizing a good enough model that you've home built. But a lot of times it's just like get it working and start selling.
You know, FOMO is a real thing. Everyone is, I know, no one raised their hands when they said, when they were asked actually, how many use Cloud Code versus any other model.
A lot of people will raise their hand for Cloud Code. No one will raise their hand for Gemma.
Exactly, everyone uses Cloud Code because it's so popular for coding, obviously, right? Because if you're not using it, you have this FOMO. I'm definitely missing on something because there's so many posts on X. If you go to Twitter, literally, I use Cloud model in 5 minutes. It literally built my SaaS product. Like wow. And then you see that, and then you go, I'm missing definitely something here. Okay, I gotta go back and just subscribe. And then on the other side, Jensen Wang says, if you're an engineer, if you're not using if you're not spending 200,000 to 300,000 per year on your tokens, you're not doing a good job. Of course, he has every incentive to say that because he wants to sell more GPU, he wants more compute. Definitely, that is exactly what he says. So what I mean to say that the FOMO is definitely real thing. Okay, that's one thing. Okay, so when it comes to your work, first you need to, as a developer or you're an enterprise, I mean, you have to look at what your task is. Okay, what is the best model that I can use? Okay, just like Devinder was saying, so yes, can we just get away with the small models? I mean, with the 1% performance degradation. That's okay, you can do that, absolutely. You don't really, just like I was saying, you don't really need a cloud level model to go read your emails, guys. I know, I mean, Cloud tells you actually, hey, you can connect your Gmail to Cloud Code and then it reads your email. But what's the bill to read your emails, right? That is exactly what I'm saying. So the moment is right now is the right model for the right task. Unless you figure that out, what is the right model for my right task, you're gonna keep on token maxing, okay? And at some point, you know, this token maxing budget has to match your productivity gains as well at some point. Are we really doing that? This is actually, so far, I get really excited with this. If you really go to X or Twitter, whatever it is, this is exactly what I've been seeing for the last 2 years. Everyone goes on Cloud, and then they build something by coding, and then they just present it on X. And then everyone goes like, whoa. Wow, I mean, the Cloud can do this, the Cloud can do that. But no one does that with the GLM 5.5 or DeepSeek V4 again. Because of course, I mean, they do some great marketing actually, to be honest, the Anthropic guys. And then we all fall for it, and then go, boom, just the bandwagon, and that's it.
Yeah.
Exactly. So you have to figure out, please, I mean, this is actually what from my experience, I would like to tell you that. Please try other different models and see what the performance is like. Do not even, I know it's very hard to like, oh, why do I just like Devinder mentioned, it's hard to, cook every day at home, and that's why you just go and just do that, right? So but please do it. I mean, just use a small model for your evals or small models for just a simple task. And it will do a great job, actually. It does, actually. I'm telling you from my experience, it does a great job. I swear I'm telling you, you do not need a flagship model for all your use cases. That is exactly how you bring down the cost.
Yeah, we can have questions from the audience now.
Yeah, let's do that.
I would, it's not a question, but I say that I use Cursor a lot, and it gives me an amazing results in just a $20 plan.
They usually give you like, to be honest.
Yeah. Oh, I use a chain. I have Claude code underneath sort of like my terminal.
What kind of change?
A chain is simple, right? Like, so I run everything through Cursor. So Cursor is constantly checking my work. I have like essentially a skill built up for the 3 separate models in the same file. I usually have Codex running my GUI work simultaneously as my Cloud Code work is doing my sort of like backend work. And I have Cursor sort of checking against like the API endpoints, the actual use cases, the actual test building. And then I have them sort of check each other's work. It's a temporary sort of harness that I've created, but it works really well and also allows me to speed is such a pain. Like right now, I don't care how fast Cloud Code goes, especially if you utilize tools like GSD, right? Like all of this like creation and then all of the agentic sort of parallelization, it takes so long. So if I can have like 9 models working on my code at the same time, I do. I just have them iterate over like the same scales file as long as like the criteria are met. And I use sort of like a behavior-driven development approach, which works really well on this.
More questions, please?
Yeah, so this is a question for Devinder. Like, so I've seen you on a lot of events and not for like apart from the coding agents and all this thing. I have like a general question of AI. So do you think LLM is the future, or what do you think? Because we were talking about fine tunings and all those things, right? So to give a new context to the AI, like we just need to fine tune. There's no other way. Like it can't run by itself also, right? So what's the future of AI looks like? Is that LLM or there will be something new?
Yeah, very good question actually.
Of course there's going to be something new, right? LLMs get all of the marketing hype right now and all of the budget right now because they're doing really, really well and we haven't sort of reached the ceiling of their capabilities. But, some LLM type models like Mamba exist, they do better expert work. There's decent amount of work in neurosymbolic reasoning that might yield some like really interesting results that will actually give you a lot more sort of verification around like decision making and a little bit better insight into why the model is doing what it's doing. And all of these things matter. If you can break down why the model is doing a certain thing a little bit better, you can maybe utilize it in more regulated fields because you can then justify your answers. These things are happening in the background. There's a ton of research happening in the space. But the thing that obviously is going to get the most limelight is the thing that everyone's optimizing for that's still working and getting better, and which is LLMs.
And I also think world models and the kind of development that's happening in that space is something that is also important to look at. Like, it kind of made me look back into model predictive control NPCs, where we were able to predict the next state of the model or state of a particular action scenario, depending on where we stand right now. Those kind of things got kind of like out of the frame when we started looking at autoregressive models, but I think gradually people would try to culminate, things from different, platforms, different domains, which probably has a massive history of technical development and research. And I think those pieces would be joined together to have something that's more like intuitive, that defines actual intelligence rather than just having like autoregressive models. I'm sure like for spiking neural networks, there are so many other mechanisms people are working on, and I'm hopeful that we can see some progress in the recent upcoming years.
Any questions? Any other questions?
So for the fine tune, actually, the question was basically, how do we? Is there another technique for fine tuning or something like that? Or-
I was saying like there is only way for AI to learn new things by fine tuning. There's
Right.
no other way.
So the model is just a model is like a brain, right? Obviously, brain with its own knowledge that is trained on. It's a generalized model. It doesn't have a context to your domain knowledge. Basically, it cannot answer your specific question. It will just get general knowledge. So the techniques that we use these days is a RAG. RAG is one thing actually. So to give it some context. And I'm sure there's going to be other techniques that's going to be just like what we're building this through the skill set. So we're using the skill as a middleware to give the model more context, and then you can just call different skills for the different contexts and the different expertise. So that is exactly what we're doing. So so just like I just mentioned earlier, like model can never be the product anymore. If you're really building your business on top of the model, even for Anthropic actually, they know that. That is the reason they're releasing all this. If you know that, 6 months ago they released skills, and then they released their own MCP servers and blah blah blah, and they're building products around the model. Actually, they're constructing something really beautifully around that. That is exactly why Greg Brockman also tweeted that model cannot be the product anymore. So model is just commoditized. So what do you build on top of the model is going to be more important than the model itself. So that is my opinion.
Do we have any more questions from the audience? So that.
Oh, yes.
Since we're talking about the token cost and commoditization, and you have been to China recently, do you think the cheaper cost of tokens will actually ultimately impact the expensive models in the US?
Oh, for sure.
So I think it's more about the cheap cost of open source like models and compared to how expensive LLM in the US.
That's a good question.
Of course. We've actually seen this trend, right? Like a lot of price drop happened right after like DeepSeek version 2 or 3 came out. Across the board for frontier models, this is going to be always the trend, and companies are always going to optimize for like what price can we get away with, not what price is best for the customer, but what price can we get away with and maximize sort of like the balance of like us making the most amount of money while charging as much as we can, but like also keeping it low enough where like the threshold is the customer will pay for it. As soon as competition shows up, there's a whole thing about like supply and demand. As soon as like these guys open up more supply, that's even remotely comparable. Businesses have to look at whether like we switch. There's like the whole mythos thing is more of a scarcity thing, but a very similar concept. But like in different ways, this kind of scarcity versus like availability will always adjust the price. That's just economics.
The new release GLM 5.3, it performs design-wise. I'm talking about. It performs on par with the Opus 4.5. It's way more better actually. If you can tweak it a little bit. Yeah, more better.
In what function?
In design. So far, what I've seen is a design.
Design for you, or you designed it?
No, the model design things actually. If you ask the model to design something, and then you can compare it to what Opus 4.5, it does, and compare it to pretty much like if not better, it's the same basically, and it's probably 50 to 80% cheaper than Opus 4.8. Yeah. There is one threat to Anthropic or any flagship models in the US. Single threat is the open source models. Dario knows that. He would do everything in power to literally like destroy them. He would work with the government or whatever it does, because it's the biggest threat for open source. If they do really well, that's it. I'm sure they panic and they get into the boardroom in the back room. Seriously. So they know that this is coming. I think we're gonna see more and more regulations coming from. I mean, just like they're saying that they're gonna you're gonna have to prove your identification going forward to use the Mythos level model. Actually, that is the only way they're gonna introduce the Mythos into the public. Actually, That's going to happen pretty soon. So they're going to come in steps, step by step actually. But we're going to see a lot more than that.
Yeah, I want to say, thanks.
I want to say that from a marketing / business positioning point of view, laying down the foundation that something is too powerful for the vast majority of people to use and only a small group of people should use them is a great starting point for, oh, by the way, as the other models also get too smart, maybe not everyone should have access to them. And then gating all of these things. It's just like standard regulation and like monopolization, right?
Yeah.
It's not so brilliant if you just take a step back and look at it for what it is, but it is brilliant in the sense that somehow it's working.
Actually, Sam Altman said, it kind of, it was trolling Anthropic. It's like, we built the biggest bomb that will kill everybody, but we want to sell the shelters. So that is exactly what it is.
I would say more of an opinion than question that cloud code is like very good, but it uses a lot of costs, and in future the costs will increase. So more of I bet on more things which will get cheaper done, like Cursor. I bet on Cursor is a good deal, and since every model is anyhow an AI, so I feel like humans defining it well makes any model, even the lowest model, good.
Right.
Like if you define architecture, workflow, and test cases, MDs,
Yeah.
any model, any agent can understand that.
Yeah.
I have one question for Inference.
Wait, I have one last thing to say. No, it's okay. Anytime you see something like this, take a look at how the problem is being framed. Are they framing it as like it'll always stay like this? As in like you freeze everything else, all progress, and you say, oh, these models need to be 10 times more costly. And they're not sort of like looking at the moving curve of everything that does like reduce cost, everything that does actually move with time, and productivity that does increase. Anytime you see that, it's a great smell test for like they're just fear mongering.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I have a question for Inference. So when we see the benchmark advertised of like new open source model, we think like, oh, these are so good models, right? But the problem is like when you try to get access to this model, right? So either you deploy yourself, which is very expensive, like I said before, or you need to use like a provider like ZMI Cloud, like Fireworks, friendly AI. So the problem with them is like they quantize that model, right? And when you quantize that model, you don't get that performance. You are expecting like GLM 5.2 to be like same as like Opus 4.8, but when you quantize that model, you almost lost 80 to like 70 to 80% of your the quality, something like that, right? So one of the things I like about the Inference is, so if we can deploy our own model on that level, right? Like,
Exactly.
So that's going to be a great point. But my question is like, how expensive will it be? Like, is it worth using that model, using Inference, or is it going to cost me the same as using Claude when I use the full model? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you're fine-tuning a model, basically, that is why are you fine-tuning in the first place? Because to give it a context, the model gives it more context, so it behaves like how you want to behave with your own domain knowledge, right? So that's one thing actually. But what happens when the information changes? You will fine-tune again. So that's the problem with the fine-tuning. And what was the first question again? Sorry.
My question is like the model you get on third-party provider like GMI.
Okay, actually. Yes. So okay, do you know the degradation from FP16 to FP8?
Yeah.
How much?
It should be around like 60 to 80%.
No, it's not.
How much?
2%.
Really?
I swear it's 2%. Seriously, look it up. That is the only difference.
Sorry, FP, how much you have?
FP16, yeah, floating points, FP16 to floating point, yeah, actually, yeah. You can even go down to FP4 actually if you have less memory. It's much cheaper to serve the model actually. You're only losing maybe 5 to 8% of the performance actually. That is why there's so many GGU of models actually. There's small models actually. The people how to use them because they don't care about the performance degradation because it's only very small, like not even 2 to 3% actually. And it gets so much cheaper to serve actually. But in your use case, if you want to use the model for your own use case, I mean with your own domain knowledge, I would say try instead of fine-tuning it, because I mean we used to think like fine-tuning would be the way to go, but then the problem came, then the information keeps changing. So what are you going to do? You're going to fine tune again, seriously. And then the models keep changing. There's a new model every day. Right? Are you going to change the model as well? Exactly. So that's the reason. So you stick to your model, but make the model more smarter by giving it more context. And then you build around the model. Let the model just to work as a brain and give it more tools like your hands and legs and what to do, and then you will literally give it more context. Boom. And then make sure the context can be updated. That is exactly what we're doing with the MD file, Markdown files. So these Markdown files actually, they can be updated anytime, and then boom, just like that. Just like you write. That is exactly what Prashanth said actually. It's basically creating your LLM wiki.
Yeah.
That's exactly what we're doing through the Markdown files, yeah.
Alright, I think it's time's up. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you Devinder. Thank you Prashanth for your time and for your feedback and insights regarding the questions that the audience has been asking and the discussion regarding open models, regarding large and small language models, and how the industry should look forward to progress of AI. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have you been to Guangzhou or Shanghai?
Went to Hangzhou, I went to Suzhou, and I went to Shanghai.
Guangzhou is the place. That's where all the DeepSeek, DLM.